and hot!
Hi guys! Today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite subgenres of all of science fiction, and that's military sci-fi. I have a list of 15 science fiction book series. All of these books are very character-centric and they're very action-packed. And they tend to focus on groups of individuals and worlds that I want to spend time in. I mean, what's not to love?
Hell yeah.
A couple of things first. What do I consider to be military science fiction? I'm going to go with the simplest definition for my channel possible. And that's going to be the main character has to be a member of the military and they have to experience some kind of action or battle. That's it. Now you're also going to notice that there are some very famous science fiction books that are not going to appear on this list. Those books are not on this list because they're not in a series or they don't meet that exact simple definition of military science fiction. I said no, Heinlein. That also might be because I haven't read them yet. I said no. With that being said, I also want to add my disclaimer that I am not in the military.
You don't say.
Now, to make this list just a little bit more exciting for you, I also decided that instead of giving you a countdown, I wanted to do a ranked list in terms of the Army ranks. So that means I have organized these titles in terms of private, corporal, lieutenant, major, and general. I'm also going to do 2 pull-out ranks towards the end. The first is going to be cadet for those of you out there who haven't read military science fiction or want a good place to start. And then I'm also pulling out the ROTC because this is essentially the honorable mentions section. For some reason or another, they don't actually qualify for the list, but they're still worth mentioning. All right, you guys, let's start with the class private. Now remember, even though they're on the lowest rank, they still made the list, which is something, okay?
I guess.
So these are still great series, but something about these series made them to be the lowest class. Usually it has to do with the fact that subsequent books in the series don't actually qualify as military science fiction, or they do, and I just stopped loving them as much as I loved the first several. Let's talk about the 4 series that are in this rank. The very first one is going to be the Vorkosigan Saga by Louis McMaster Bujold. You guys knew this was coming up. This book series is very expansive. I'm not even 100% sure which books by her are considered in the Vorkosigan Saga and are not. I'm going to say I think it's a 12-book series. I don't know. What I can tell you is that this book series is in this rank because while I really enjoy a lot of the individual books in this series, starting with the book Warrior's Apprentice, I would say that not all of the books in this series are considered or would qualify as military science fiction. Some of them are more enjoyable than others. So my recommendation for the Vorkosigan Saga is to start with Warrior's Apprentice and follow Miles Vorkosigan. Miles was born a cripple, which allows us as readers to really get to know his extraordinary mind, his charm, and his incredible luck as they carry him through all of the impossible situations that he finds himself in. He does join the military in these books, and we are able to focus on his military experience as we go through his life journey. There are, again, some of the books that follow him that really encompass his military experience, and then there are some that just focus on his off time. The next one in the private category is going to be The Old Man's War Saga by John Scalzi. This is a 6-book series, and there's rumor that there might be a 7th. This series starts with the book named for the series called Old Man's War. In case you're living under a rock and don't know what this series is about, it follows the 80-plus-year-old protagonist named John, whose wife just died, and he decides that there is nothing left for him and joins the military. where the military has promised that they will rejuvenate his body and yet leave him all of those life experiences and send him across the galaxy to fight an intergalactic war against aliens that are a threat to humanity. This book series is very popular and very fun, and I really enjoyed it up until book 4, where it really starts tanking for me. So this one is a little bit of a lower rank for me, but I really did enjoy those first couple. The next series in this private class is going to be The Enderverse by Orson Scott Card. You guys knew this one was going to have to be on the list. It starts with Ender's Game and is a 4 to 6 book series, depending on how you want to go about it. In case you don't know about the series, we follow Ender, or Andrew, who is the third child in a family of geniuses that the government has plans for. They draft him at the tender young age of 6 into battle school, which is on an orbiting satellite and dedicated to training its future military leaders to fight the aliens known as the Buggers. Ender must survive his classes, he must survive practice arenas and VR headset games, and also his fellow cadets, who don't handle jealousy very well. As Ender climbs his way up to the top of his class with the help of his friends, only to discover that the military has some secrets that will haunt humanity for the next several generations. This is a fantastic first introduction into military science fiction if you're looking for one, but the rest of the series doesn't quite qualify as military science fiction. Is it good? Yes. Is it maybe better than the first book? Absolutely. But it's not technically military science fiction. I will say that if you want to stay with military science fiction, there's an offshoot series called the Shadow series that follows his best friend that I do believe is a little bit tighter into the military science fiction side of things, but this one is definitely still ranking on this list. And the last series that is in the private class for today is going to be the Honor Harrington series by David Weber. This series is an 18-book series that starts with On Basculus Station. As a punishment for embarrassing an admiral during war games exercises, Honor Harrington is sent to Basculus Station. She resigns herself to doing a good job in a bad situation. She decides to hold up her honor as an example to those criminals and corrupt politicians who are on Basculus Station. She ends up cleaning the criminal underground, meeting several old enemies that turn friends, and even having some naive blunders that she has to recover from. This story is one of hope and holding up an example for others. She eventually discovers a rebellion that's brewing and a plot to take over Manticore itself. This is a fun series that really follows Honor throughout her entire career. However, the reason why it's in private class is that eventually Honor starts becoming more of a Mary Sue. She begins to not show any character growth, and the battles start becoming bland and boring, focused more on explaining all of the different movements on the battlefield than actually talking about the characters or moving any of the plot forward. So for me, this one was a fantastic first couple reads and then really started branching off from there. Our next category is the corporal category. These two series in this rank are here because they are the bread and the butter of military science fiction. They have some of the stereotypes that we see in this subgenre, but we love it for a reason, right? So the first one we have is by Marco Cluse, the series Frontline. This is a 8-book series that starts with Terms of Enlistment. So in this series, we follow Andrew Grayson, a realist who knows that his only realistic way out of the slums is either to win a spot in a colony lottery or to join the service. So what does he do? Of course, he joins up. We get to see him go through boot camp hell, fall in love, and come out on the other side, only to find out that he is assigned as an army grunt while his girl gets to be a pilot, just in time for a warfaring alien race to make first contact. Sounds a little bit like Starship Troopers, if I do say so myself.
Yum, yum, yum.
However, the story finally takes off on its own with a lot of twists and turns, following Grayson through both his triumphs and his defeats as he comes into his own as a soldier. This book doesn't have any earth-shattering changes to the military sci-fi genre. Like I said, it's a bread and butter one, but it's what I like about military science fiction. It really grabs my attention and my emotions. It's very action-packed and character-heavy, and I really get to know Grayson and his team as he goes through all of these adventures. It really does a war hero's journey right, if you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
The other series that belongs in the corporal category, that's bread and butter, is going to be A Confederation of Valor by Tanya Huff. This is a 5-book series that starts with Valor's Choice. And in it, we have humans who have finally been granted membership in the Confederation of Species, but for a price. In this series, we're following Sergeant Kerr and her team, who have been pulled from their long-awaited leave into glorified babysitting. Honor guard of the highest ranks. But lucky for them, it doesn't turn out to be as boring as they thought, and there may or may not be conspiracies brewing. Throughout the whole series, we end up following Sergeant Kerr and her team through many different missions, diplomatic conundrums. We also have epic battles, and it's a very serialistic, episodic series that you end up getting to know Kerr and her team. She is one of the most competent, without being annoying, female military science fiction protagonists out there. I really love her and her team. I also really have come to love her snappy comebacks and also some of her incredible luck in the missions. This is a definite series to get you started on that bread and butter military science fiction with incredible competence, but is definitely a little bit more episodic and old school than maybe some of the other series that will later appear on this list. Next, we have the lieutenant category. Now, these are going to be books that are beyond the typical bread and butter. They usually have some kind of shtick or interesting aspect to the story, but a little bit of them is just a touch off. As in, you have to look past something. Maybe it's a little dated. However, it is in a higher rank than the other two categories because it does something a little different. I have 3 different series that are in this lieutenant rank. The first one is going to be Legion of the Damned. That starts with the book of the same title. This is a 12-book series by William Dietz. In a world where the terminally ill and death penalty criminals have a chance to upload their consciousness after death into a cyborg body to be drafted into the military known as Legion of the Damned. We follow multiple points of view through this story as it carries us through 9 books and 2 sequel prequels. We get to see a selfish emperor who is loyal only to his own pleasure. We see corrupt aristocrats try to overthrow him, xenophobic aliens attempting to wipe out all of humanity, and a cyborg soldier who is trying to atone for the murder that earned him the death penalty in his first life. I was initially turned off by this series and this very first book because it was very heavy on the objectification of women and the emphasis on sexuality in this book. It was a little bit off-putting, and I think he emphasized it so much because once our main character becomes a cyborg and is no longer able to do those kinds of things. And I think the author was trying to throw at us that he was unable to do those kinds of actions, so everyone else sort of made up for his lack of that. I don't know. I would like somebody to tell William Dietz that he doesn't have to include that much gratuitousness to keep his readers. But if you can move beyond that aspect of the story, it begins to get really nuanced, very complex, and the rest of the series starts getting into some really interesting social commentary, political commentary, and some deep dives into technology and AI, the kind of way that I really have come to love. So this series is one that I do recommend, but I do want you to note that you do have to look beyond that hypersexuality in this series. The next one in the lieutenant category is going to be by John Ringo, and that is the series Posleen War. That starts with him before battle. In this book, we have Earth's first alien contact, which is way different than we expected. It is an advanced pacifistic race who require human soldiers to fight their war for them against an advanced but warmongering race called the Posleen. And of course, our military very quickly agrees to fight this war in exchange for some trifle advanced technology. And they pull our main character out of retired marital bliss into a war against a more advanced race who has never been defeated. But things aren't always what they seem. I really had a good time with this story. I thought it was a really interesting premise. However, this first book is something that I had to get a little bit past. I had to suspend my disbelief because it begins very stereotypically and it doesn't really explain a lot of the initial contact. It kind of rushes to get you into that situation or into the plot, and there's some considerable plot holes, plot conveniences, and stereotypes that it takes to get you there. But once you're there, the book really gets interesting, and things significantly change when you get to the second and the third books. So this is one that I would recommend if you can get past that initial stereotypical beginning. The third series in our lieutenant category is going to be Wayward Galaxy by Jason Anspach and J.N. Chaney. This is a 6-book series that begins with, shockingly, Wayward Galaxy. This follows a character named Reach, who is trying to escape the unending wars on Earth and has finally finished his military contract and trying to turn over a new leaf by becoming the liaison between the civilians and the military in a new venture, the colonization of a new planet. He agrees to be on the very first ship who is going to the new planet to make everything ready, and it's a 40-year commitment to cryosleep. But when they arrive, they find that there are many other colonists already on the planet, and they appear to have been there a long time, and they're still acting out a lot of the wars that they left back on Earth. And that isn't even their biggest problem. They may or may not have arrived in different time period than they expected. This is a really fun series that focuses on this group of soldiers who are trying to get away from military, but are inevitably learning that the needs of the community are that they become the soldiers that they used to be. And I really liked the series. It was so fun. I loved exploring a new planet. I loved the military aspect of this book. And there's so many cool aspects to the story, including a lot of technology and a lot of interesting alien perspectives. I really have a good time with this one. This is one that I dedicate most of my time to on audiobook. So if you're a huge audiobook fan and looking for some military science fiction candy, this is one that I would recommend. I really like that it has a lot of those tropes that I really have come to enjoy, and it can be a little predictable at times, and that's the reason why it made the lieutenant list instead of higher lists. But I love every second of this series, and it's a really, really fun one. Our next category is the major category, so we've advanced to officers. These are some of my very favorite series. And the ones that made it to major are there because they're memorable for doing more than what is typical in the military science fiction genre. We also have some conciseness that hasn't been there in the last series. All of these series are only 3 books long. So they may be a little bit more manageable, and they may be doing something a little different than maybe some of the other military science fiction book series that are on this list. So I have 3 of them here for you. The first one is going to be the series Cry Pilot by Joel Dane. The first book is the same name, Cry Pilot, and is a completed series. All 3 of the books are out. This series is a typical rascal to redemption trope that is one that I found myself thinking about when I finished over and over and over again. And there's something special about this series. A down on his luck refugee volunteers for a suicide mission as a cry pilot, lending his mind to an AI for a chance to survive against the incoming invasion. Surviving will guarantee his acceptance. So what does any self-respecting refugee do? He cheats, which of course allows him to survive and get accepted into the military training, where they discover that a more important and even less survivable battle is to come. They have to fight interdimensional creatures in a battle that they may not be able to actually win. This series was really fun and interesting because it flips that war hero story into the rascal to redemption story that I have come to really love, plus a battle and a series that may not be survivable. I really had a good time with this one, and I can't wait to pick the 3rd book in the series up to finish the series. So if you're in for one that's a little bit different, but definitely finishable, this is one for you. The next one in this major category is going to be Planetside by Michael Mamet. This is also a trilogy, and it's also completed. This one I read in an entire weekend straight because it was just on the edge of my seat. So good. In this one, we follow a pseudo-retired military man, Colonel Carl Butler, who is asked to do just one more mission, overseeing the investigation of an MIA soldier who happens to be the son of a high-profile senator. This case is demanding somebody with experience, somebody who is media sensitive and can twist things into a positive light. But as he goes to investigate the missing soldier, he gets more than he bargained for and discovers a conspiracy about the real reason of the war at hand. This was an incredibly addictive series. Each book flows seamlessly into the next one, and there is a cliffhanger at the end of each of the books to where you have to pick up the next one. I was really impressed by the high stakes and nuanced themes in this one, and I thought it was just one of my favorite candy reads that I have had in a whole weekend. So if you're in for one and you want to see what military science fiction can offer, this is one that I would really highly recommend. And the last series in the major section is going to be Machineries of the Empire by Yoon-Ha Lee. This series starts with the book 9 Fox Gambit. Now, you've heard me talk about this series before, where we're following a lieutenant in the military who is ordered to assume the role and absorb the consciousness of a military genius general who has been dead for centuries. And of course, he's also insane to boot. So throughout the whole story, we get to hear his commentary of what's happening in order to win an unwinnable war. They need the genius of this insane military commander, and yet as she gets to know him and he gets to know her, she begins to wonder if all the things that she's heard about him are true or not. This series is completed. All 3 books are ones that I have totally finished, and each book is fantastic. I really got sucked into each of the missions that she gets pulled on. I really got into some of the military conspiracies and the battles on this one. So good. So if you will want a trilogy that is completed, that is a little bit different than your usual military science fiction one, this one is great because it features that female protagonist, but the male genius is in her head, having snarky commentary as she goes along in her journey. There is so much to love in this series, and if you haven't read it, you have to pick it up. Now, before we get to the last category, I want to talk a little bit about this cadet category. This is one that is series that I recommend for brand new beginners, and as you know, I've already recommended a couple of them. So the first is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, of course knowing that the next book in the series is not military science fiction. So you can kind of treat it like a standalone, but I would highly recommend you go on to the second book. It's really good. It's just not military sci-fi. The next one is Wayward Galaxy. This is one that I just had such a good time with. It's such a fun candy read, and it just goes on and on and on, and it's an easy Audible download if you are already a member of Audible. Next, I would recommend the trilogy Planetside by Michael Mamet because it's finished and because it is such a seamless, cliffhangery, fantastic adventure. That's definitely one that I think you should definitely pick up. That's one that I think you will not be sad about picking up. And the last one in the cadet category is the Lost Fleet series by John Campbell. This is one that we have yet to talk about, but trust me, it's a good one. I have 4 books that belong in the ROTC or honorable mention category. And this is going to be Vada's War by Elizabeth Moon. This one starts with Trading in Danger and I believe is a 5 to 7 book series. I really liked this series, but it doesn't technically qualify as military science fiction because the main character gets kicked out of the military in the first 4 chapters of the first book. Now, she still gets involved in battles and still uses her military training throughout the entire series, but it isn't technically in the military anymore. So if you're interested in trying some military science fiction, but you don't technically love the military, this one might be a really good option for you. Another one is the series The Red by Linda Nagata. This one starts with the book First Light, and I do believe is a trilogy. This one follows a soldier who gets an implanted AI that helps him through his battles. There's a lot more about this series, but I didn't find it to be as memorable as the other series on this list. That's why it's in the honorable mention category. And finally, I have to mention the Halo series, which is by various authors, but begins with The Fall of Reach. Now, I have to be honest, this first book is probably the poorest written, but it does begin the adventure. There are lots of legit science fiction authors in the Halo series, including Greg Bear and many others. So if you're interested, this one might be something that is a series you could follow. Another series that I'm really interested in checking out is going to be the Warhammer 40K. For the Emperor! I know that Adrian Tchaikovsky has written several of these books, as well as many other science fiction authors that I know of, and I recently picked up a copy of Horus Rising. This one might be one that I will do a video on later. Finally, our last category. This is the general category. These are, honest to goodness, my top 3 military science fiction book series that I love. Ones I recommended to everyone and I just enjoyed the heck out of. The first one is one that I read very recently, and that is Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I was floored by the fact that I had not read this series yet. And it is one that I did as a buddy read on my channel. And if you're interested, definitely go to the Discord. You can read all of our unadulterated thoughts there as we read through this series. This one follows a military man as he is swept into a 1,000-year intergalactic war against an alien species who doesn't want to fight. This one was definitely very inspired by Joe Haldeman's experience of the Vietnam War and has so many other interesting themes. We get to experience the loneliness of interstellar travel, time dilation, and the loss of even his own culture as Earth progresses so much faster than the war does for him. We also get to see some of the coolest interstellar travel I've ever seen, like some of the most dangerous power armor, some of the most interesting military training. I mean, This is just a must read. I absolutely adored this very first book, and I am right in the middle of the second one, so technically it qualifies. It is also following our main character. If you haven't read this series, this you must read. It is so good. The next one on this list is going to be Expeditionary Force by Craig Lanson. This is the first of a 16-book series that starts with Columbus Day. On a day known eventually as Columbus Day, the alien race Ruhar land on Earth to take over. A small group of soldiers land in a small town of Maine where Sergeant Joe Bishop is on leave and, armed only with an ice cream truck, captures one. But suddenly they leave, just in time for a lizard-like race known as the Kristang to arrive, this time offering Earth peace and technology for soldiers against the Ruhar. Sergeant Bishop jumps at the chance to see an alien world and to fight in that alien war, but realizes how complicated things are actually getting when he's separated from his planet, his people, and his command structure. And he gets in between two advanced alien races because things are never as simple as they seem, including which side we really should be on. This series really surprised me. It has just enough tropes in there to keep me interested, but just enough freshness and was very well written that I was so surprised how much I loved the series and how quickly I have been consuming it. Even though it is 16 books, it is a very fast 16 books. Now, I haven't completely finished it yet, but I really loved this series. There are a few books in here that are a little bit less good than others, but for the most part, the quality is there throughout, or at least so far. So this is a series that has very quickly been becoming my favorite. And last, but certainly not least, in the military general science fiction category, probably one of my all-time favorites, that is the Lost Fleet series by Jack Campbell, starting with the book Dauntless. This is a 6-book series I have definitely completed and is one that I just adored to have as one of my palate cleansing reads, and boy did I finish this series very quickly. There are at least 3 spin-off series that I can tell, and I will hands down be picking them up. This one had such a fun premise. It follows Captain Jack Black Geary, who is an officer who saves his crew at the very beginning and sacrifices himself to defeat the enemy. Centuries later, the war is still raging on, and unfortunately, Earth is losing. In a desperate strike, the fleet is sent after the enemy's home world, only to get trapped behind enemy lines, but also to get lost. And they find a failing escape pod floating in random space, containing none other than our main character, Captain Jack Geary. He is now being worshipped as a hero centuries after his initial response to the alien species, and is put in charge of the fleet despite his protestations. Here he has to deal with the hero-like expectations that are not very realistic, all while trying to deal with military red tape, trying to stroke the egos of all the different captains, and teach the people of the fleet how to fight as a team. This series has lots of ups and downs. He spends a lot of time trying not to fight or trying to communicate with all of the egos and the politics that are involved. I felt like this was probably one of the more realistic military science fiction book series I've ever read. And if you think that it gets boring, don't worry, it doesn't. I thought that this series was one of the most nuanced and enjoyable I've read in a long while. So if you're in it for the candy military sci-fi battles, but you actually want substance and nuance and commentary, this one really does the job. And that does it, you guys, for my military science fiction book series list. What did you think of my list? Which ones did you think I forgot? Let me know in the comments section down below if you have any other suggestions. I got more military science fiction book content coming your way. Until next time.